Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming for my dissertation defense. Most of my research is related to the general idea of semantic webs, linked open data, and all that, and you will see the details in the presentation. To begin with, about 22 years ago, a major development happened, and that was the beginning of the web, or as credited to Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the HTTP protocol was coded and tested, and it started running, and the internet came into existence. And since then, most of the things related to our existence are no longer the same as they used to be. We do transactions differently, we do shopping differently, we use internet for entertainment and a whole bunch of different purposes. So a lot of things have changed. A few years down the line, semantic web came into existence because Tim Berners-Lee, along with a whole bunch of other folks, realized that the web by itself was perhaps not as powerful enough as they thought it would be. And they wanted to make it more meaningful so that machines and other automated agents can process the information and can help us out in a much better way. And somewhere around the beginning of this year, or around the end of last year, semantic web started being picked up by search engine companies like Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and all that. And Google started using it for some of its annotations, and then if they said if you provide it in your web pages, semantic web annotations, then they will be able to process it and use it for providing better ranking. Also, a major development which happened in the beginning of this year was IBM came out with its computer called Watson, which ended up beating humans in the game of Jeopardy. And a very publicized fact was that it was using semantic web technologies, more precisely a lot of the linked open data datasets. Also, Siri, which is the personal assistant which comes with iPhone 4S, it is also rumored to be using a lot of semantic web technologies. There was a blog article about it, and then Apple has been hiring a lot of folks in the semantic web area as well. So a lot of the development which has happened, it started only a few years ago, and one of the biggest things which have happened is the idea of linked open data web. And that idea is based on 4 simple principles. The very first one is that use URIs as names for things. So when you have a URI, you can dereference it, and then you can actually obtain the information which is related to that particular entity. Then you should also be able to provide SPARQL queries on top of it, or you should be able to get an RDF-based description out of it. And the other thing which was recommended is that you should include links to some of the other documents so that people can discover more and more information when they land up on a particular page. So to give you an example, if you land up on the page of Wright State University, if you will have links going out to, let's say, Dayton or Ohio for that matter, then people can actually identify the fact that Dayton has X amount of population, or what are the other universities which are located in the area of Dayton, and so on and so forth. And this linked open data set, which is basically based on the 4 simple principles which I showed earlier, it consists of this is actually an old diagram, July 2009, but it consists of about 300 data sets as of now. And these data sets consist of a whole bunch of different domains like medicine, politics, US Census, geography, entertainment, social network, you name it, and the data sets are available. And a lot of people actually say that linked open data is actually the mainstream semantic web. And a lot of the mailing list discussions, if you follow the W3C semantic web mailing list or the LOD mailing list, people have been crediting saying that this is the mainstream semantic web, this is the direction in which semantic web will be headed, and a lot of it will be about using these instances and processing these instances. But if you look at the theoretical aspects and the other aspects of semantic web, you have to question, is this really the mainstream semantic web or not? A very important part in semantic web, or in general in semantics, is the fact that relationships are at the heart of semantics. And when you look at the linked open data cloud, or anybody who's working with it, it's an obvious question which you tend to ask is like, what is the relationship between all these different ontologies which are present over there? You see these links, But beyond those links, is there any other relationship which exists between these data sets? The other question is, like, how do you use these data sets without knowing each of these data sets individually? So for example, if you go on Google and if you type your name or if you type any other term, you're able to actually get pages which give you more information about those entities. Can you do the same kind of thing with LOD? And another important thing with respect to semantic web is the notion of schema level reasoning. That is being able to infer new facts by using the existing data sets and being able to identify the fact that X is a subclass of Y or X is a part of Y and all that. Is it possible to do these kinds of things with the linked open data cloud? So these are some of the questions which the LOD community has been trying to answer, and some of the questions which I try to investigate as a part of this dissertation work. Now, because I raised the question, so I should also have some solutions to it, otherwise it's going to be another normal thing where people just ask questions, they never try to have a solution for the problems. So like I said earlier, because relationships are at the heart of semantics, then there should be a way to identify these relationships between these entities. And if we are able to identify these relationships, then probably a lot of these issues can be solved and can be alleviated. Now, those of you who work with LOD, you probably realize the fact that LOD primarily consists of the same as relationship. And even those are erroneous, they can be refined, there's a whole lot of debate, an altogether different debate which can probably happen around that issue as well. So in order to identify the relationships which are beyond the same as, what can you do? A very simple or a naive solution is that you can perform a matching of these ontologies using some of the state-of-the-art ontology matching tools. And that is exactly what we tried to do, but later on I'll show in my dissertation that it actually doesn't work. And to answer some and more of these questions, basically my dissertation is focused on these. And that's why it's titled Linked Open Data Alignment and Querying, because I try to align these data sets using novel relationships and querying techniques and all that. So this is the agenda for the dissertation. Basically, first I try to identify the motivation and significance of this research, like why it is important, what can be done using these. Then I raise these research questions and the solutions which are related to these. What is the current state of the art? And what have I done and what can be done using these techniques? And then finally, questions and comments related to the research. We went into the details earlier. Linked open data basically set of best practices for publishing structured information which is available on the web. And as of latest count was around 295 data sets, the published one, and they have about 50 billion triples, and this is only a rough approximation. If you try to ask anybody what is the exact count of these triples, nobody can give you an answer. People have different statistics because they take different data sets into account. Some are excluded, some are included, and so on. Linked open data actually started as a very small movement, and at one point of time it was actually possible to give the exact count of the number of triples which are involved, because there were only about 10 or 12 data sets in total. But then it started growing steadily because people wanted to publish more and more data, and then by 2009 the picture was becoming so big that it could barely fit on the screen of your monitor. And right now if you basically, unless you go and start clicking on each of these individual bubbles, it's extremely difficult to identify what these data sets consist of, how are they related to the other data sets, and what are they doing. This gives some more information about the linked open data and like the different kinds of domains, how many data sets there are, what is the general proportion, all that. Now, this thing has been around for almost about 6 years. Now, if I were to ask the people who are familiar with this, or even people who surf the web, how many applications related to linked open data come to your mind? I'm thinking it's really hard for anybody to come up with an answer for that specific question. Anybody in the audience who wants to take a guess?
Did you say Watson earlier?
I'll show some details about it. So, I tried to investigate the same question. And the place where I tried to basically get the answer was the most authoritative source, that is the LOD mailing list, which is on W3C. And I basically sent a question asking, how many commercial applications are using linked open data? And I monitored the thread for a really long time, I actually still do. And I got only one reply. And there was one person who sent me an email privately saying that this is where we are using linked open data. So after 6 years, it's unfortunately a very sorry state of affairs where you basically just end up getting one email saying that, hey, this is where we are using. And I had to compile a list.
Now, given that BBC and New York Times have put up link open data and some others use that, one can argue that that is actually being used.
So the question which
Okay, isn't each data set at least used by the people who put it out?
So they are just putting out the data set, they're not using it. So if you, for example, there is a person who's maintaining the US Census data set. So what he's doing is he's basically just getting the census flat files and he's just converting it into RDF using a Python or Perl script and he's just dumping it out. He's not using it, he maintains the website regularly. So, and I'm not sure even about the biology folks, a lot of them, they're putting out the data. But if you think about any applications which are using it, and that was my question. So when I asked that question and when I started looking around, these were the only 4 major applications I could come up with. And notice the fact that it does not include Watson, and there is a reason for that. So if you, BBC Music, it actually utilizes a whole bunch of LOD data sets. For example, it uses Jamando, it uses Music Brains and all that, because they try to get the details about the artist and the concert venue and all that. FaWiki is a social bookmarking website, so you can basically tag terms using the concepts from the other ontology, but it's, again, I don't think anybody in this room is using it, for that matter. IBM Rational is an interesting use case because they do not use linked open data, the data sets. What they do is they are utilizing the linked open data principles, the 4 principles which were given by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So what they try to do is they try to identify the entities which are present in any software engineering project, and they try to link it and see how they can be, if you can infer more information related to it and so on. And then the last one is the British Museum. If you go on their website, you can pull out some cool facts. So if you're looking on any monument, it can tell you like what city it came from, what era it came from. Basically, it's pulling out a lot of information from DBpedia, such as population and all that. And this was what the information which I got from the mailing list. That was this person. I'm really thankful to him. And he also told me that they're using it for their university website. And that was about it. Now, some of you mentioned Watson because...
I think there is Thales.
Thales has shut down.
Yeah.
Thales shut down their operations.
Oh,
Their semantic web operations.
yeah, startup Civil that uses.
Okay, and what are they doing with it?
They use for music suggestions on YouTube. It's a plugin, but it's startup. Yeah, got it.
Okay. So any kind of serious commercial applications, I don't think you'll be able to find an answer because I've searched for this for like a month. Now, I actually ended up talking to somebody who was involved with the Watson team when I went for my job interview there. And this was the guy's answer, which is present over here. The only component which they used was a simple class hierarchy, nothing else. They actually told me that when they started plugging in the other data sets, it was so noisy, so bad, that they actually ended up noticing a decrease in the performance. And if you have read details about the Watson team, it was so strictly monitored and controlled. Every single step which was performed, they had to show that it was leading to a performance enhancement. I think by like a factor of 5% or 10% at least. Otherwise, they cannot have that system. So this was the only part which they used, and that too, they were using it for, I think if I remember correctly, for finding things like if X is a person and if X is mentioned as a politician, then they can basically infer the type hierarchy using it. And that too, it was only Yago class hierarchy which was helping them out with that. Natural question to ask is, why? Why do we have such a sorry state of affairs? Let's take a much simpler query. Identify Congress members who have voted no on pro-environmental legislations. And they have high pollution industries located within their congressional districts. Now, anybody who works with linked open data or in general, if you try to answer this query, even using those data sets, it's extremely difficult or impossible to do it. And the reason for that is this extremely poor modeling of the information on the data set. This is basically just saying a simple statement that Nancy Pelosi voted yes on the healthcare legislation. And this is an actual RDF representation of the GovTrack data set. It's very difficult even for a human to figure out what is going on over here. So try figuring out general purpose programs or anything like that, which can basically parse this thing and make anything meaningful out of it. Another example, very popular data set, which everybody talks about, geonames. So let's see over here, you have a populated place which is denoted by p.ppl, and then you have a whole bunch of other populated places, PPLS, Israeli settlement and all that. Now, common sense says that this should be a subclass of this, but that's not how it's represented on geonames. Because it's essentially an RDF dump, which they ended up using Python and Perl scripts and ended up transforming it. So it's basically a database representation on a web page using RDF format. This dissertation essentially tries to fix some of these issues and more by identifying better relationships between these data sets. What it tries to do is it tries to utilize information which is present on the web as well as information which is present in the LOD cloud to basically do simple things. Identification of relationships between ontologies or data sets which are present on this cloud, being able to do an ontology integration, and then being able to query multiple data sets without knowing each of these data sets in detail. Because if you have to query 300 different data sets, the state of affairs will make you look at each of these 300 different data sets, figure out how the relationships are indicated, and formulate your Sparkle query accordingly. Something which I mentioned earlier, just to recap, it's LOD captures these instance level relationships, but there's a significant lack of these class level relationships. And it is these class level relationships which you actually require for doing reasoning, ontology integration, and querying without knowing these individual data sets. And these class level relationships are essentially your superclass, subclass, equivalence, and these kinds of properties. So the solution which I came up during my dissertation work it's called Bloom's, which is bootstrapping based linked open data ontology matching system. This system is specifically developed for LOD ontologies, but as I'll show later on, it actually works even well for general purpose ontologies. What it is supposed to do is, like I said earlier, it's supposed to identify schema level links, such as subclass, superclass, equivalence between different ontologies. And what it is able to do is, because it can identify these relationships, it can actually align these ontologies together. And therefore, what you can have is this upper level ontology which can bridge the gap between these ontologies by providing hooks to them. So let's take a look at what are some of the existing approaches which people usually have for ontology matching, or the field of ontology matching. And this will also help us in understand why we needed a new approach, which I tried to come up with my dissertation. So most of the schema matching approaches which you have, they are usually of two different types. They're usually individual matchers, or the other one is where you start combining matchers. I'll come back to combining matchers in a bit. So these individual matchers, they basically try to come up with new techniques, or they have techniques which can be utilized at the level of schema or at the level of instances. Now these techniques, they could either utilize element level information, that is basically if you have an XML file, so it will have tree structure, so any of those elements are, sorry, I messed up. It's the element level actually consists of linguistics and constraint based. So linguistic, basically using dictionaries or thesaurus or any of the string matching based techniques. The constraint based basically utilizes things like finding type similarity, the kind of thing which I was basically saying in the case of Watson, which they utilize. The structure level, they are the ones where you are actually able to match graphs and see basically where things fit in with each other. And then the element level techniques, it basically again utilizes these linguistics-based or constraint-based. And then these hybrid matchers, you can actually put together techniques from a whole bunch of the spectrum and start combining them. And this combination, it can be of two different types. You can have a manual composition where you actually say that, okay, I'm going to use this technique, and afterwards I think this can allow me to have this kind of results, and then I can process it further and so on. So that is, the same thing goes even for composite matchers as well. When we started using some of these systems, we actually got pretty interesting results on these ontologies. The very first one was the fact that nation was equal to menstruation, and it was confidence level of 0.9. Not quite sure what 0.9 means in this case. And after experimenting a whole bunch of these different tools, I noticed something that they were performing extremely well on some of the existing benchmarks, which were established years ago. But they're usually not so good when it comes to basically giving them a new schema, or when you try to use them in industrial scenarios or industrial schemas or anything like that. And because LOD ontologies, they consist of a lot of the real world data sets, so they were having the same issues even with LOD ontologies. Because these LOD ontologies, they're very different nature. They have been created by the community for the community. So it's basically a bunch of people who are sitting together and trying to create these schemas. A lot of these schemas are actually coming out from database terms, like I mentioned earlier, so there is not a lot of focus on the modeling of the information. It's basically just getting out the instances. The battle is for creating the biggest bubble over there, which can hijack the other or hide the other bubbles, and they won't be visible. It's not on identification of meaningful relationships. A few years ago, there was this data set which came out, which was linked open data numbers. And they claim this is the largest data set and nobody can beat us, and it's a fact. And that data set still exists over there. It was supposed to be an April Fool's Day joke, but that data set still exists there. And because of the nature of these data sets involved, you have to come up with solutions which are beyond just syntactic and structural matching as well. And that is what my system Blooms tries to do. Blooms, like I said, it essentially utilizes information which is available on the web as well as in the data sets themselves to identify better relationship. And because I showed the diagram of the way in which conventional schema matchers work, a natural question to ask is, why would you do that? Why don't you use some of the existing dictionaries and all that? The problem with existing ontologies, dictionaries, thesauruses, they have very limited coverage. And a lot of these LOD datasets, they contain information about live entities. And most of these upper level ontologies and dictionaries, they have information which are general purpose nouns and all that. So for example, if you try to look up information about any singer, Freddie Mercury or Queen, you won't be able to get that information from any of these WordNet or upper level ontologies. And community generated data, although it's very noisy, which I say I'm using, but it's very rich in a lot of the content. It has a decent amount of structure present in it, and it has a very good self-healing property. What it does is that if you try to mess up anybody's Wikipedia page or anybody's any public profile page, a lot of it is fixed within a matter of minutes. Although I understand the fact that we had a discussion about this in the lab meeting and the pages were not fixed. We have to. And these problems of ontology matching have a notion of context associated with them. And these public pages, such as Wikipedia and Freebase and all that, they capture different context. And they give proper citation as to why we are saying this thing is happening. So that is another reason why I am using the public data sets such as Wikipedia for this purpose. Wikipedia, the English version alone, the last time I checked, it had about 2.9 million articles. It's probably the largest collection of information you can get. It is continuously expanded by about 100,000 active volunteer editors who are not being paid, they're just doing it because they want to contribute good knowledge to the society. like I mentioned earlier, multiple points of view can be mentioned without any battle. Well, there are battles, but you can basically put a citation saying that why this is happening, and it will be taken into consideration, and if the majority agrees with it, it stays there. And article creation correction is an ongoing activity, so even if something happens on Christmas Eve or on the day of Christmas, somebody will take care to put it in there. So it's not like a traditional encyclopedia where basically people sit down and do it once every 5 years or 4 years. The way in which I try to do information integration or ontology matching using Wikipedia is by utilizing the categories which are associated with every page. So on Wikipedia, categories are used to organize the projects. Very few people tend to notice these categories. Usually you have to scroll down at the bottom and check those categories. They're basically small, they're essentially links to other pages which are more generic than the page which you're at. And these article categories, they have very simple rules. So one of the rules is that the category which is on the extreme left is more significant than the category which is on the extreme right. So essentially the significance is decreasing from left to right. You do not place the article in every single category, but rather you place it in the one which is most directly relevant. Once you place it in one of the categories, if that category belongs to another category, the article automatically becomes part of it. So it's almost like, for those who understand subsumption and all that, it's almost like that. So it's almost like you would think it's almost like a tree structure, but then there are certain issues with it because a lot of these categories, they end up looping back. So for example, you might have category A which points to category B and B is going to C. Turns out C again points back to A. So it's not really a tree structure, it turns out to be a graph actually. And for a lot of these articles, their category system overlaps. So for example, if you have a page which is related to Wright State University, and if you construct the category hierarchy tree related to it, and if you go to the page of University of Dayton or University of Cincinnati or Miami University, when you construct their pages, and when you construct their category system, and when you try to compare the two, you will see that there's a whole lot of overlap which is going on between these different graph structures. And that overlap is the fact which I exploit in my approach. So in my approach, the very first thing is to pre-process the input ontology. By that, what I mean is that I take the class names, I remove the property restrictions and stuff, I remove things like namespaces and all that. The next thing is simple string tokenization, where I tokenize the class names by removing underscores, hyphens, any other delimiters which come into picture. And I break down the complex phrases. So example, if you have a phrase like semantic web or Wright State University, I'll end up breaking it down into much simpler phrases. So these won't be just adjacent to each other, there will be a space so that it's readable. Once I get that, then I try to identify the corresponding article on Wikipedia. So if you have the phrase like semantic web or Wright State University, I'll use the Wikipedia web services to identify the article which is related to it. And I basically use the Wikipedia search service for this particular purpose. For every single article which I found, which the system finds in the previous step, I construct the category hierarchy tree for these. That is, I take the concept name and then it basically identifies its categories. Those categories belong to other categories and so on. It is different than a typical ontology tree in the sense that an ontology tree, or when you look at it, or an ontology, you have the most generic concept on the top, that is the owl thing. And then it becomes more specific and instances are at the bottom. So this is just a complete inverse of it, where the most specific thing is on the top and the most generic things are actually on the bottom. And I only expand it till level 4. And there is a reason why we did it till level 4, because after a lot of experimentation, we realized that after level 4, everything starts getting related to everything on Wikipedia because the categories, they become so generic. It starts talking about things like life, science, philosophy, light, universe, and so on. Once we have the Bloom's tree constructed for each of these different concepts, we utilize it for comparison with the other Bloom's trees for the other concepts which are present. The very first step which is involved in this is to basically identify what are the common nodes between these two different trees. And once you have that, then you try to keep only the top level common nodes. Because, like I said earlier, it's actually a graph, so you may see the same node being repeated down. But my assumption is, which I prove with the results, is that if you have seen the node at the top, then it's not going to contribute any additional information by coming at the bottom. The next step after pruning these trees is to compute the overlap between the trees. It's, in a nutshell, what I'm essentially trying to do is I'm trying to see where one tree is fitting overall with respect to the other tree. So what I'm able to do is compute the overlap score using a simple formula. Now this formula was actually modified in one of the later papers where we are actually even able to identify contextual information which is related to the ontology matching process. And the one for which we end up getting the higher score, so for both the entities we will compute the score, so you have concepts C and D, so we will see how C fits in with respect to D and how D fits in with respect to C. And for each of these we compute the score. So for the one which you're able to get the higher score, you can actually say that the other tree can actually fit in completely in the other one, in that one. So you can say that it's a subclass of the other one. One additional step which we do after this is done is basically pick up this piece of information and verify it on the web using web pages. So once you have things like a musician is an artist, then you can actually go on the web and find documents and parse them and figure out whether that fact is supported or not. So to give a running example for this particular process, let's say if you have two different concepts, jazz festival and event, and you're trying to figure out what is the relationship between jazz festival and event. So the very first thing you would do is to construct these trees. So jazz festival is your concept, event is your concept. You will try to identify the categories, so you will get jazz festivals, and for this one festival, and these categories will further expand into more categories. And then you will see what are the common nodes between these two entities. So over here you will see that this tree will be pruned after all these nodes, whereas this one will be pruned right over here. And because jazz festival had to take 2 or 3 additional levels in order to become as generic as event, it supports the formula which we had where if you have more nodes, then it's basically considered to be a subclass of the other one. And basically, using this approach, we were able to implement the system. When we implemented it, there were 2 different objectives which we wanted to evaluate. One was to use Bloom's, the most important thing, for the purpose of LOD ontology matching. And the second one was to make sure that it can also serve as a general purpose ontology matching system, the kind of benchmark which they have in OAEI or some of the ontology matching competitions or tracks which are there. When we compared Bloom's with some of the other systems on the linked open data ontology matching, what we noted was the fact that both in case of precision as well as in case of recall, we were at least able to get 2 to 3 times improvement in both precision and recall. Now, there were, one thing which I should clarify is the fact that there are no existing benchmarks which are available for these different data sets which are part of the linked open data. For example, there is no established alignment for music brains and DBpedia. So for that, what we did was we asked people to help us out with it. Basically, they were asked to assert the relationship between these ontologies. And then the system, the results which were generated by the system, they were compared with the benchmarks which were provided to me by the humans. And then it was compared, and on the basis of that, these results were obtained. So clearly it shows the fact that when it came to linked open data ontology, it was actually able to perform much better than the other systems which were out there. We also compared it with the ontology alignment initiative track, the reason being that they provided some benchmarks as well as ontologies in order to do the comparison. And when we used it, we basically in their own waters. So we were basically able to beat them in the new territorial waters, and at the same time we were at par with them in their territory as well. So what this system allows to do is basically it allows the linked open data sets to go beyond the same as relationship and identify schema-level relationships such as subclass of, equivalence class, and so on. One of the things which I complained about earlier is the fact that linked open data primarily consists of the same as relationship. And therefore, there is a need for identification of different kinds of relationships on the linked open data cloud. So this particular work is related to that. That is the part of relationship identification on LOD. I repeated it like 10 times. All the LOD data sets are linked by the same as relationships. But the fact of the matter is that other relationships such as partonymy and causality, they are extremely important, especially if you're trying to build intelligent applications such as Watson, or if you're trying to do any question answering, or any sort of knowledge representation, knowledge acquisition. So in order to support some of these fundamental relationships, the approach is PLATO, the approach which I came up with. It's the part of relationship finder on the linked open data tool. Another reason why I named it PLATO is because he was one of the first guys to look into this aspect of part of relationship as it occurs in nature, and what kind of entities can be linked by it, and so on. The PLATO approach it follows a few simple steps. The very first thing which it tries to do is it tries to identify all possible partonomically linked pairs between these different ontologies or these different concepts. And for this, it utilizes the notion of strongly connected or strongly associated entities. By this, what I mean is that, let's say if you go on Freddie Mercury's Wikipedia page, you will get a link to Queen. And if you go on the page of Queen, the band, you will get a link back to Freddie Mercury's Wikipedia page. Now, it may happen that Wright State University also gives a link out to Freddie Mercury's Wikipedia page because of the College of Music or whatever. But if Freddie Mercury's page is not linking back to Wright State University, then it basically indicates that the two are not strongly connected. Now, this is more of a filtering step in order to reduce the total number of candidate pairs which I have to process in order to identify the relationship. So if any of you you might have a question saying that, hey, this is a very limiting step. You can actually get rid of this step. It's just going to take a lot longer to process the information than if you don't use the step. The next thing which I try to do is identify the type of each entity which I am processing. So what I try to do is, like, let's say if I have Freddie Mercury and Queen. So I'm going to identify the class information about these entities from their ontologies. So let's say if you have DBpedia page of Freddie Mercury, it will say artist, musician, performer, singer, and so on. What it allows you to do is it allows you to, these generic concepts which come in the class names, they allow you to look up the information on WordNet. And from WordNet, you can actually get the lexicographer files for some of these. So if you look up artist and try to identify its lexicographer files, it will say that it's actually a noun.person. If you do the same thing for a band, it will say it's a noun.organization, and so on. And there's a reason why I am doing it. And the reason is Winston's taxonomy. Winston was a linguist who about 30 or I would say 32 years ago came up with a categorization of the different partonomical relationships which occur in nature. What he did was he studied the partonomical partonomical description as it occurs in linguistics. And he said that it actually corresponds to 6 different types. One of them is the component integral object type. So if you're talking about handle and cup, then this is the component integral type because the parts, they perform a specific function, they are not identical to the whole, and they're separable from the whole. So he used these 3 criteria, whether the part is functional, non-functional, whether it's same as the whole or it's different than the whole, or if it's possible to separate it from the whole or not. Another category is member collection. So for example, tree and a forest. So you can take a specific tree out of the forest. It is not doing a very specific function with respect to the overall forest unless you end up chopping all of them. And it is not necessarily identical to the rest of the forest as well. There could be shrubs, bushes, and all Then one of the most predominant one which you see in nature is the place area relationship, to indicate things like Everglades is part of Florida or Dayton is a part of Ohio and things of that nature. What he also did was he identified specific text patterns in text which can actually indicate this kind of a relationship. So for example, place area relationship, it is indicated in general literature or text as located in, part of, and so on. And feature activity has two different phrases, has and have, and so on and so forth. This is just a small set. There is actually, this is a much longer list. This is just a small set which I have represented over here. And he also provided some simple rules about how you can have transitivity working across different patronomical relationships. So for example, if you, like some of you might be thinking that you can have an example where, you know, this Dayton is a part of Ohio and somebody lives in Dayton, then somebody is a part of Ohio. So he clearly gave rules as to under which conditions this kind of transitivity will work and under what conditions it's not going to work. One of his simple rules was the fact that if you try to use transitivity across the same kind of patronomical relationship, it is valid. So for example, if you're saying things like Dayton is part of Ohio and Ohio is part of the United States, then you can make statements like Dayton is part of the United States. But if you say things like Simpson has a finger, the X is Simpson's finger, and Simpson is part of the computer science department, then you cannot say that his finger is part of the computer science department because it's basically going across two different kinds of patronomical relationship. So he clearly gave clues about where you can use it and where you cannot use it. Coming back to my approach, what I do is I utilize the taxonomy and I generate linguistic patterns using these cues. So what I'm able to do is, for example, if you have two things like cell wall and cellulose. So using this I can actually, and the type of entities, I can say things like, these are the patterns which will fit in there. So for example, cell wall is made of cellulose, or Dayton is located in Ohio, and things of that nature. Those of you who follow linguistics, these are also known as the Hurst patterns, which was given by Professor Marty Hurst. So using these, what we do is we test these patterns in a lexical manner using the web as a corpus. So we basically formulate the queries and then we start using the information which is present on the web using one of the search engines. The search engine which I use is Bing. I'm not endorsing it. It's the only one which will allow you to use web services. Google and the other search engines, they don't allow you to use the web services unless you have a commercial agreement with them. And once we post these patterns on these, using these web services, we identify a whole bunch of search results. The next step involves going to those search result pages and actually parsing them in order to identify whether that pattern is really present on that page or not. A lot of time information is outdated or it's not present in the format where you want, the format in which you want it to be. So therefore you have to parse these pages and see whether that pattern occurs there or not. Once you get that, you can actually, it basically gives you a count that this particular pattern occurred so many times on the web, and this particular pattern occurred so many times. So for example, for cell wall is made of cellulose, there were 48 pages which were confirming this particular fact. However, cellulose is made of cell wall. There were only 10 pages which were indicative of this fact. There could be more pages on the web, but in order to perform the processing in a limited amount of time and all that, I restricted it to 50 pages, which were the top 50 pages which were occurring in the search results. Once we have the instance level information, such as cellulose is part of cell wall is made of cellulose and all that, what we can do is now we can utilize the class level information which is related to these instances in their ontologies and assert schema level statements about these. Now, coming back to the example of a band and an artist, it is not necessary that every artist is going to belong to a band, but if you have a band, it is going to have some artists at least associated with it. So using our expressions, we are able to assert those kinds of statements by using our restrictions and say things like, if there is a band then using a restriction, you can actually say the fact that there is an artist. So, and this process is done by monitoring the instances continuously. So if we actually end up finding something which is conflicting, then we remove it. So when you will start looking at artists, initially you will come up with the assertion that artist belongs to a band, but soon you will start seeing artists which do not belong to a band. They are independent artists or they're solo artists. But every single time you will see a band, you will notice the artists which are associated with it. So therefore only this assertion will exist, the other one will be removed from the system.
Yeah, I have this question. So how did you search for those two phrases?
So basically I use the Bing Web Service API, and you can actually specify the pattern which you want to search. And what it does is that it basically...
So it literally looks for that sentence?
So I did two different kinds of things. One was where I was putting it in double quotes to do the exact search. If I did not find the exact match, then I relaxed it, basically by doing an exact match, and then parse the web page in order to see whether that pattern actually existed or not.
So it looks for that sequence.
Exactly. Yes, and like I said earlier, so this is just made of is just one of the phrases. Then I also search for part of and all the entire list of expressions which can be there. In order to evaluate this approach for identification of partonomical relationship, there were a whole bunch of evaluation objectives associated with it. One was to identify the different kinds of partonomical relationships, which were presented in the table earlier: instance taxonomy, place, area, component, object, and so on. How good it is with respect to basically finding part of relationship within a data set. So example, just finding part of relationship within the DBpedia entities. And then the other one is finding part of relationship across these data sets. So the LOD cloud can have relationships beyond sameness. So for example, finding part of relationship between DBpedia and Freebase. So when we performed an evaluation of this particular approach, we noticed actually when it comes to precision, it was actually doing very well. It was like, if you take an average, it will come out to be around 0.7. Basically, in like 70% of the cases, we were able to correctly identify the partonomical relation. Whatever partonomical relationship we had identified was actually the correct partonomical relationship. Natural question or obvious question to ask is, where's the recall? The problem with giving the recall information is that it is not possible to compute it in all cases. It's the same problem as trying to find a recall of a search engine. Because if you have, let's say, human body, then it's extremely difficult to enumerate all the different body parts or every single one of those. So it's extremely difficult to give recall for this kind of evaluation. We did perform a smaller evaluation, which was performed, so this one is between entities of DBpedia. So all these entities are corresponding to DBpedia, and one of the things which I should clarify is portion mass part of, there is no result. And the reason for this is that the portion mass entities, they usually consist of things like hunk of clay, slice of pizza, and all that. So these expressions are so general that usually you cannot find the bidirectional link between them to begin with. So it's extremely difficult to process it and identify a partonomical relationship. Or even if you find web pages, they will not say it in the exact phrase. It will be spread across. Like for pizza, you will see Domino's delivers fresh pizza for $7.99. The slices are freshly made and so on. So it's extremely difficult to identify and parse those expressions. Now, the second evaluation, which was, like I said, was a smaller evaluation, we took entities from Freebase and DBpedia. So what we were trying to do is, we're trying to figure out, like, if the ingredients were mentioned in Freebase, if we can identify the corresponding dishes which they belong to in DBpedia. So if you have, for example, a dish called Baked Alaska on DBpedia, can you identify the fact that it actually consists of ice cream and cherries and strawberries and all that from Freebase? And for this, the good thing was that we were actually able to obtain a list from Freebase, which gave a systematic list of all the dishes as well as the corresponding ingredients. So we had a third-party benchmark to go with it. Once my system generated the result, then what I did was I basically ran it across that list, and I was able to generate both the recall as well as the precision figures for it. Now the precision is a little lower in this case because if you search for this kind of information on the web, a lot of it is very subjective because you might prefer to put salt in your yogurt, I might prefer to put sugar in my yogurt, or blueberries for that matter. So it's a very subjective thing, so that is why the precision varies a little bit in this scenario. The other task was the anatomy organ task, where we were picking up the organs from Freebase, and then we were trying to match where they link to in DBpedia. So for example, if you have a thing like chamber, so chamber is supposed to be a part of the heart. So can we identify this kind of information? So for this, when we calculated the precision, it was actually pretty high, 0.86. So in almost 86% of the cases, we were able to correctly identify that these body parts belong to this. The end result of both of these, PLATO as well as the Bloom's approach, is to be able to create kind of an upper ontology or an upper level schema which can fit on top of this LOD cloud, so it provides hooks to enter into the LOD data sets. So you don't have to know all of these individual 395 or 295 data sets, but using this, once you identify the relationship and you have an upper level ontology such as Sumo or Dolce or Proton, you can actually just align them and use those to actually identify where is the information present which you are looking for. And this approach can be utilized for the purpose of querying, because now if you want to query these individual data sets, all you have to do is express the query using these upper level ontologies, and basically the system should take care of it. Something which I didn't mention in the beginning is, that's how I started looking into all these issues. Is I was originally interested in the issue of how to do querying across these data sets without knowing these individual data sets. Basically the idea of federated querying, which has been investigated pretty heavily in the database community. Dr. Shade's work is in that area as well. So how do you go about doing that? And once I started looking into that problem, I realized that there is the only kind of links which are present are the same as links. And using that, it's extremely difficult to construct an approach where you can query these 300 odd data sets without knowing each of these. And I started investigating as to how do I go about finding these extra relationships? What kind of systems can help me out? So basically in a nutshell, I did not start with the process of, or the problem of relationship identification or information integration. It was the problem of querying. Some other work which I have done, so these are the two works which I've described in detail, but there's a whole lot of other work which I've done as a part of my PhD, which I'll just summarize it over here, is requirement document analysis, something where the work which I did at Accenture during my very first internship. It was using state machine-based approaches to validate whether the requirements are valid or not, and it also utilized some of the semantic models in order to verify that. Then querying of partonomical relationship, this is funny because this work actually happened before I did my partonomical relationship identification work, but later on I realized that I can actually plug this system in on top of PLATO to basically have a system where the user can express a query without knowing the exact relationship between entities. So for example, if you have knowledge modeling where school is part of county, and county is part of state. And the person ends up actually writing a query where he's basically looking for, find me all schools which are located in the state of Ohio. Now if you take a typical Sparkle processing system, it's not going to find that information for you, because Sparkle works by strict graph matching. What this work allows you to do is, it identifies the partonomical relationship which exists between these entities, and it's going to rewrite that query according to the modeling of the information. And it will generate the correct query for you, and it will identify the information and present the results for you. In the very beginning, when I started my research work, I was working with Matthew Perry on creating operators for spatiotemporal thematic querying of RDF-based data sets. So basically specifying bounding boxes, temporal limits, and seeing what kind of information can you come up with and what it can be done. This was implemented on top of Oracle Spatial, which also provided support for RDF. And the other, something which was a very tiny system, was plug-and-play system for Blooms, where if you don't want to use Wikipedia, if you have a more domain-specific requirement, let's say if you want to use any of the biomedical ontologies as your source, or as your bootstrapping system, then you can actually go ahead and put that in. So we tested it with WordNet and I think Demos. Those were the only other two systems with which we tested it with. Result of all this work has basically been published in a number of conferences. The Bloom's work was published at ISWC, as well as the ontology matching workshop. It was actually a poster at the ontology matching workshop and the full research paper at ISWC. Bloom's Plus, something which I did not cover during this talk, which basically allows you to identify contextual alignment of entities. So, for example, if your ontology has facts like you have Jaguar, and the other piece of information you have is car and animal. So depending on what are the other entities which occur with Jaguar, it can actually correctly say whether this Jaguar is an animal or whether this Jaguar is actually a car. So it was able to do that. It was published at ESWC, normal research paper. Then a small extension of it, which folks at Accenture did, this was done at ICBL. Then the work at Accenture also led to a patent, which is still pending with the US Patent Office. The PLATO work was accepted at the ACM Hypertext Conference recently. And the other work which I described, it was accepted at the AAAI Spring Symposium. Then there was a conference related to geospatial operators, GOS, and also at a software engineering conference as well. This work, like whatever I have tried to solve in this dissertation, is a very small step in this overall idea of making linked open data usable for other applications or for other smarter applications. So one of the things which can definitely be exploited using this bootstrapping-based approach is the automatic domain identification of data sets. So being able to automatically say that GOS is actually talking about spatial data sets or geographical information. So if I have a query which is talking about that kind of thing, then I can just send it to GOS and not worry about the other data sets. So this is something for which you can exploit other data sets such as Freebase, DBpedia, provide hooks into it. And this is something which I'm working on currently, and Cersei is doing most of the work related to this. Property alignment on linked open data cloud, that is being able to identify things like somebody who's a father is a parent actually. The reason which I think this work can be significant is because if you look at any of the LOD search engines, for example, Sigma, and if you search for, let's say, Barack Obama, it presents all the facts, every single piece of information it can find in line by line. What it does not try to do, or what it's not trying to do, is identify things like combining information, such as Barack Obama is the father of Sasha and Malia. Or saying that it's same as Barack Obama is the parent of Sasha and Malia, or saying that it's actually father of is a type of parent of. And this is something which Kalpa and Sanjay are working on with me right now. Then another thing which I started thinking about recently is the idea of personalization of property and concepts match. And for this, I want to utilize machine learning and data mining based techniques. What I mean by this is, if you present results to a user on a continuous basis, you should give them the freedom to basically say that these are the kind of results which they like and these are the kind of results which they do not like. And if you can learn those preferences, then you can probably identify better matches for them in future. So again, if let's say somebody who's working in a car dealership is saying that Jaguar is a car for me, so next time you actually see a Beetle, you can automatically say that it's a car based on the previous information you had collected about the user. So for that, probably some of the machine learning and data mining based techniques can be extremely useful. The main inspiration for this is basically the Pandora online streaming station, because they do similar kinds of things where they learn your preferences, and in future they try to play the music which is based on what you have liked in the past. This is a list of the papers which have been published as a result of this dissertation work, the complete list basically of all my publications. If in case any of you are interested in getting more details out of it. One of the patents which came out of this work, Max yesterday was talking about the importance of patents, and thanks to the folks at Accenture, I actually had an opportunity to work on one of those. This was filed sometime last year, related to the Blooms Plus work, which I did when I was an intern over there. Acknowledgements. These people have helped me out a lot, my committee members. Dr. Shit for giving me the freedom to pick up my own topics, working on issues which I wanted to work on, making me do things a lot of times which probably I didn't want to do, but they were useful. Pascal for all the, I don't know, all the guidance, all the help, all the pep talks, all the lunches. Dr. Prasad, he was the very first professor I started taking classes with when I joined Wright State University, and anytime I needed some guidance about a new topic, I could just walk into his room and he would help me out. Kunal and Peter, don't have enough words to express my gratitude for you guys. Every Wednesday at 4 o'clock, they had reserved their time to talk to me about my research and what I was doing and push me, like even if I was slacking off, or basically tell me that I'm not doing it right, I need to fix it. Initial drafts of paper which I sent to them, they had to pretty much rewrite it because they were so bad. I spent a lot of time doing all that stuff. Corey, my friend, thank you for all the coffee breaks, research talk, discussing Georgia football, Reds baseball. He was the first person I met when I landed up at UGA, and it was exactly 6 years ago on this day. That's when I started my PhD as well. I was trying to find the direction of the LSTIS lab where we guys used to work, and was fresh off the boat, and I had a thick Indian accent, and the lady in the front office had a thick Southern accent, so it was just not going anywhere. So eventually he helped me out because probably there were a whole bunch of foreigners in the lab, so he could understand me, and he helped me out where the lab was. Noise's lab members and support staff, Tanya, they have helped me out a lot. Every single person you have helped me out in some way or the other. Folks at Accenture Technology Labs, they have made I've worked for 6 months out of 6 years over there. It was a fabulous time. Every single time I had to come back, besides the fact that I was leaving California to come back to Ohio, it was also, I'll be missing the other aspect was I'll be missing working with them and having all the fun which I had while doing my internships over there. It was a great time, every single time I worked over there. Acknowledgement to the funding agency, without which I don't think I would have survived in grad school. 2 different grants. The STT grant, on which Matthew Perry and Dr. Shit, they were really key people who worked on it, and I basically picked up and started working on it. And then the Eager project, Dr. Shit, Pascal, their ideas led to this particular grant and the work which went on with it. That's about it.
Eager had a lot to do with yours.
Any questions or any comments? I'll be happy to answer that.
Did your system answer the query about the voting?
Yes, if you express it in a Sparkle, it was actually one of the queries which we demonstrated in the paper, that it is possible to answer that.
So you talked about this same as and the refinement, the inheritance thing, and also the partonomy. Are there any other relationships that are worth pursuing?
Absolutely. Causality is one of those, because it can be extremely helpful, especially in the case of health domain, for that matter. For example, if you have certain things which you eat, and they can have an adverse reaction, so you can actually you can probably model it in certain cases using the causality relationship, or for chemical reactions, saying things like this causes fire, or this causes this, or eating a lot of hot food causes heartburns and things of that nature. So that is one of the relationships which is definitely useful. Then there are certain relationships which are probably more numerical, like greater than, less than. For example, the population of India is greater than that of the United States. Things of that nature which can be utilized for reasoning purposes. So I think pretty much, like, I think when I looked at the OBO ontology, So every single one of those relationships which were captured over there, if there is some way of identifying those on LOD, I think LOD can be more meaningful than what it is right now, and probably that list, which consists of only 6 applications, it can probably grow up to 60. Because people in, especially medical science, they can utilize a lot of this data set which is present over there, and that's the only community where I've really seen people genuinely excited about all the data sets which are coming out.
So basically pick up like UMLS and take all the relationships and try to align with these.
Exactly. Because a lot of the information which is in DBpedia may not be UMLS. But that can be very helpful.
UMLS is something like what, 9 relationship types?
Yes.
So the interesting thing here to reflect on is the fact that while the computer science and we often think about same as and then maybe partonomy and others, in reality, for knowledge base to be really useful, you really have to support relationships just the same way of the kinds that UMLS has. That is really when a knowledge base will become actually useful, because that's when it has a knowledge expressed at the level of depth or semantics that humans care about, that human decisions rely on. So to the extent that people will remain same as, they'll be very far from being able to help anything with real applications and humans, to the extent that, and I think hopefully this partonomy and other relationship types will help us the next step, but in reality, you really have to go towards more domain-specific relationship and really support them.
Yeah, actually the reason I asked the question is because, for example, we have some work on reasoning with, let's say, the causality in the disease symptom context.
Right.
So you're basically suggesting that your scheme can allow us to build larger background knowledge to work on.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things which I definitely wanted to investigate, is these other kinds of relationship, if I can exploit or I can transform the PLATO approach for part of, beyond part of, so like causality and all that. So it might work. The initial testing which I was doing, just randomly playing around with it, it looked promising to me. The only issue which I noticed was the fact that there was nothing like a Winston's taxonomy available for causality kinds of relationship, and that is extremely useful because it was basically classifying and where things will work, where things will not work.
As far as I know, causality will have to be domain specific.
Yeah,
Yes. Exactly.
We've done work in InfoQuill project quite a bit actually, and where it looked at geoscience, earth, digital earth issues. So it was-
Pascal, Kunal?
Dave.
Hello?
Hello, Prateek.
Yeah.
Yeah, one question here. So how's the relationship evolution taken here in this system? So first thing, the systems are fantastic. Like given this type of data and the problem, you really showed what with the data set. The question is, in this data set, if there is any evolution with this relationship, how that is taken here, like this temporal aspect in those relationships, just keep the concept or like at the end.
So, I mean, a very simple...
And how it can be integrated in this system.
Very simple thing I can think of, just I haven't thought about it, it's a good question to ask, but is probably some kind of a reification of these relationship and give provenance information. So basically saying that, let's say in case of countries, there is a breakaway region, but I run my system right now, so I can say that as of July 27th, 4:15 p.m., this region was part of this country. And later on, when the system processes it again, it may find that that piece of information using the temporal provenance is not correct anymore. So it can probably fix it. That's probably a simple solution which I can think of, is basically having different, have some kind of like, if you go on Wikipedia, you can notice all the revisions which have happened for a specific page. So same thing, same kind of thing you can probably capture. Peter, Kunal, Pascal?
Actually, no,
just go back to the very beginning of the talk, because I'm curious about your take there.
Okay.
What do you actually think about the 4 linked data principles?
This session is being recorded, you know. They are, I think they are a stepping stone, but I mean, with all due respect to Sir Tim Berners-Lee, but I don't think he thought about the aspect of knowledge modeling or information modeling when he was thinking about it. I think he was still very much focused on the web, his take on the general web, basically, that make information available to people, make information freely available. How that information is modeled, or how it should be related to other pieces of information, I don't think he was thinking a whole lot about it. So there should be other additional points where there is a need for other additional points where that kind of those aspects can be captured. So for example, basically saying things like, when you have these HTTP URIs, then make sure that you can identify a more generic piece of information related to it, or more specific piece of information. So basically lifting it up or lifting it down, basically those kinds of things. So that is, I think, an extremely important aspect. And also the fact that, I don't know, it will probably be music to your ears, but the fact that you should be able to run a reasoner on the ontology without having any contradictions.
Do you think this really would be a good and helpful requirement? I mean, last thing you mentioned.
The thing is, like, if you're putting up these data sets, and if you want the scientific community to use, if it's not correct, then how are you going to trust it?
Yeah, I think I have 2 responses to you.
Okay.
So one is that there can be contradiction, but I think then we need to
Capture it.
Yeah, to basically localize them,
Yes.
rather than have global ramifications.
Absolutely.
So that's one part of the story. And the other part of the story is that we do sort of dignify wisdom of the crowd and things like that. But we should also realize that there is also chaos caused by the crowd.
Absolutely.
And that's the price we are paying.
Absolutely.
And that is the reason they try to make the principles as easy as possible, right? To publish the data.
Easy is that people like quick and dirty things, and let
Right.
others
Exactly.
figure out the rest.
I mean, it's something which is a fact which is not very widely acknowledged, but LOD is primarily a bunch of developers who are writing quick Perl and Python scripts and dumping their databases.
So the other thing is, if you look at it, fundamentally it's sort of at a very infrastructure level, and only barely touches the issues of data. And if you go to any fundamental modeling aspects, you really at least even have the level of data and information model or schema or something along that line, something that are similar at set level, something that are and there are generic relationship types of interest to you, or so in addition to the to call that URI as the entities is really too I think naive, and really have to allow people to specify more meaning than what it does. So this is simply a data level. Even with the RDF you say, there is nothing more than expressing syntax thereof. And there's not much that you can understand what the data is about. You really have people to self-express what the data is about, so that others can understand and enhance and use, kind of thing. Now, of course, you should make optional things like constraints, inbuilt parameters for expressing quality or being able to validate the quality and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, it has to go beyond just the pure data or syntax of the data.
Okay, here's another question for you. So as the size of the linked data set goes up, right, and as the number of bubbles go up, do you see that the quality of each bubble, there is a big differential? And if that is so, then can we think of ranking and others to help us out in basically buoying up the ones that are good and the others getting kind of trashed down?
So part of it is what the work which we're trying to do with Cersei, the yellow pages for linked open data. So that is what it tries to do to a certain extent is, so for example, if you search for, let me step back. Right now, if you search for, if you're trying to look for music related data sets, you cannot find any, like, unless you start clicking on each of those bubbles. So what the work which we are trying to do, the yellow pages for LOD, is basically you go and you type in the search bar or search box like Google has, and you say music. Then basically come up with a ranking of these data sets based on their relevance to a specific domain. So basically that will address, I guess, the second part of your question. Now, the first part, so when LOD came into existence in the beginning, so these data sets, it was, people were so excited about these that the mailing list, I remember they were actually pointing out triples which were wrong. That, hey, this piece of information is not correct. You need to fix it. Because it was manageable. Now, if you notice the mailing list of the LOD community, the main folks who are behind this, it has become, the discussion has started revolving around things like, what are we doing with this? They're no longer trying to identify the quality of the data sets or if the data is actually accurate or not accurate. Some of these data sets actually have gone down. They don't even exist anymore, but the bubbles are still there. For example, there was an RDF data set related to the SEC filings of companies, which I wanted to use a little while ago. But that data set is actually up, but it's still, whenever they repaint the picture, they don't remove it. So their quality, I think it has gone down since LOD came into existence. Peter, Kunal, Pascal, any questions?
I have a question. Just wanted to just hear your thoughts and insight on. So, at the very beginning, right, one of the arguments you're making is that people are not using the LOD as much simply because the kinds of relationships there are not that useful.
Right.
I mean, they're useful, but they have limited, they can only go so far, right? And then the reason to essentially enrich it with these additional types of relationships of autonomy, et cetera, right? I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts in terms of, how rich of this, in terms of this enrichment must we be able to achieve in order to really make this very large collection of data or knowledge applicable to many different kinds of content, right? So obviously, autonomy is a really big first step, right? And you're able to now do a lot more. But autonomy obviously is just one other. There's many others, some of which you're already working on, like on down. So, right? I can then also imagine the temporal relationship, this can go on, right? So, in your opinion, where do we stop, right? And how far? And how much more do we have to go?
I mean, I guess the question which I can ask for that is like, why do we have to stop when it comes to identification of these relationships? Because the more and more we are able to identify, the more intelligent systems we can design, I guess. So even I think with respect to like any of these relationships, I guess once we identify, okay, this is causality. So what kind of causality? If we are able to identify that in more detail, then it can definitely help. So I mean, I don't know if I'll say that we need to stop. I think if we can identify better and better relationships or different kinds of relationships, I think it's definitely good, because only limitations we have are with respect to the methodologies and the technologies with respect to identifying these. So I don't know if we need to stop.
And another
Mhm.
I mean, one view of it is that, that's perfectly fine. Obviously the web is extremely more involved because there's so much redundancy. I can essentially use that redundancy to my advantage, in the sense that, there's bound to be some systems out there that are arguing, right?
Right.
There's that inflection point coming, for my ability in terms of saying, sure, volume might be going down, but there's just so much content that there's so much redundancy that even if there are some bad apples in the bunch, there's still enough good ones for me to be able to detect noise and move it down.
Absolutely. I think it is an important step. I think, but there are a few reasons because of which I guess it has both a flip side as well as a good side. Because these like different entities, they're redundant and they're connected by the same as relationship. So it definitely helps in getting different aspects or different eyes on the same entity. So for example, if you're looking about the number of attendees in the London Olympics, depending on the data set, you might be able to get different kind of information. But that redundancy, I guess, will also lead to the problem: which one are we going to trust? So unless, we can mark things or in certain sense annotate them or give background information saying that according to MSNBC, or this is the approximate attendance in the London Olympics, or according to CNN. So being able to give that kind of information, I think that can definitely help while having the redundancy going on. So it's, I guess the simple answer is being able to associate the background or the provenance information related to it.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. Definitely, the source from which the information came from is definitely a very good indicator in terms of the quality, right? Obviously it's not going to be guaranteed, but it's always a good indicator.
Absolutely, because right now, if you look on DBpedia, the only piece of information they capture is the info box. And that info box basically just gives you a flat number. And nobody has any clue where that flat number came from. So that will definitely help.
Hey Prateek, this is Kunalia.
Hey, Kunal.
Hey, so let me ask you a slightly different question, right? Which is a bit more philosophical.
Okay.
One way to think about the world is that yes, people will create these models of the world and have this hugely global data cloud,
Mhm.
right? Another approach is that a lot of that information already exists.
Right.
Wikipedia, forget Wikipedia, but just text all around the internet, right?
Right.
So if you did want to have reasoning,
Mhm.
where do you think is bigger bang for the buck? Is it by creating these semantic models and trying to model the whole world, or is it in being able to understand the text and infer things from that and go from there?
So, based on the systems which I have seen with respect to, like, for example, Watson, the system which tries to actually, people think, parses the natural language and answers query using that. So what I learned about it when I went there was the fact that they were actually parsing these web pages, and they were collecting this information and putting it in a structured format, because it was easier for them to use it for question answering later on if they can generate this knowledge base using by parsing these the unstructured web. So if we can figure out better techniques for NLP processing and parsing and use those to collect structured information, I think that's where the sweet spot is. So both of them will have a spot. It will just be that NLP will basically end up leading to better structured information. Does that answers the question, or is something else?
No, I think it's in the general area, right? Because that's what I've been wondering about a lot is to, treating these models, right? They're expensive. On the other hand, being able to generate these models, we are not at a stage where we can generate them completely accurately. So what's the middle ground?
Yeah, it's probably the same question even, I guess, existed when you were doing your research as well. But I think only if we can improve the NLP parsing techniques and processing techniques and basically make them more intelligent, it will probably lead to the sweet spot. Any other question, guys?
All right, so we'll say thank you to the audience and catch up with you later on.
Thank you, guys.
The committee will be on.